Hi everybody, I'm Brian with Knox Company, and I'm going to show you how I built these floating shelves that actually go across the window here. I'll walk you through step by step everything it took to make them. I made them for just under $30, and I will get to how I made them for 30 bucks. But I'm going to walk you through every step of the way so you can make some of these yourself, or just take some ideas of some of the things that I did, use what you like, but I'll show you what I did here to get the job done. So to start off, we have about a 36-inch window. So the width of these are just over 43 inches. I wanted to go past the window about 3 inches either side, because the way that the window's framed is you're going to have a stud that runs along the side that goes all the way up to your header, and then you're also going to have another stud right here that goes all the way up to the top plate. That is your jack stud and your king stud. With those two together, you're going to have about 3 inches of wood that you know that you can screw into. So I want the base to go at least to that distance, and on a 36-inch window that brought me right to about 42 or so inches. You also have to factor in the drywall. So I cut the base to just about 42 inches, and then I put the base together. I'll show you guys how I did that. What I did is I took some 2x4s that I had already in the garage. So again, this is where I started to save some money. I cut 3 different pieces to length, 2 of them being the main piece, the main width, which I cut at 3 inches on the table saw. Then I cut a piece in half because I wanted to kind of lengthen the top portion of it. So when I put these together, it kind of makes an L. And the reason for that is because on top right here, I'm actually going to be screwing it in. And rather than having screws just running along the back, I wanted to give myself about 2 or 3 inches of material to screw into. So these are overbuilt. There's nothing wrong with overbuilt, but it's just because they're going in my new workshop kind of office area. So I figured why not overbuild it a little bit. I'll show you guys that here. When I cut that half piece, I laid it across the top. Everything is the same length, but obviously we have the 3-inch back piece and then the 1.5-inch top piece. I did a little layer of glue. I screwed it down with a couple screws that go all the way through, about 2.5-inch framing screws. Let it sit. I did use some clamps just to make sure that everything was nice and tight together while it held. But even just while I was making the other one, it had some good grab and the screws will hold it all together. So you can make this whole project pretty much within a day. But that is the main foundation of our frame or our base that's going to hold these shelves on. Real quick, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button. It really does actually help me out. And if you want to support me in the channel, you can grab a nice Fort Knox t-shirt. I finally have the shop up. I have some of these cool designs. Everything has a flag on the sleeve. So I draw them myself, I print them myself, and I have them on there for like 20 bucks. So I don't know where you can get a shirt nowadays for 20 bucks, but I took the time to make some cool designs, find some really nice fitting shirts, and just get them out to you there for fun. So it really helps me out. Hit like, hit subscribe, grab yourself a cool shirt. I appreciate it. The next step was going to be cutting the top and bottom. So I needed 4 pieces, and I already had some MDF laying around. Now, if you are going to be making some nice shelves, I would not recommend using MDF, or actually this is like particle board. This is just stuff that I had laying around that I plan on either painting or just maybe leaving it all raw. I saved money again here by using material that I already had. But if I was going to make these to be some like really nice shelves, like if I was doing them for somebody else, I'd probably use a higher grade plywood, or I'd even go above and beyond and use something that can be painted and then use like a hard enamel paint to paint it all together. As you can see here, this is poplar. This is just like a pine basically, so it's a very soft wood. But you could even do a simple top and bottom, something that's scrap, and then you can face it in something nice. So I only had to really spend money on the face here. This is just 6-inch poplar that I ended up cutting to width, and I think I spent a total of like $30 on it. So the whole entire project cost me $30 for the 2 shelves because I used scrap wood for the base or some 2x4s, which might just be a couple bucks. And then again, some scrap for the top and bottom, which was leftover plywood. Now to cut these tops and bottoms, I knew that I wanted the shelf to be about 10 inches wide. The reason for that is because I'm actually going to be taking some internet and some routers and things here in the office, and I wanted to be able to set them up on here and have enough depth. And really the biggest thing that I was going to be putting on this shelf was going to be the router. And that's about 9 inches deep, even with the cables coming off the back. So I just went ahead with 10 inches coming off the window. But another thing that you got to consider is I thought about actually dropping this back into the windowsill because we have about 4 or 5 inches of clearance here. But then I quickly realized that with this cable right here, to be able to adjust the blind behind it, I would actually be pushing up against the blind. So I'd have to think of something else to actually be able to keep this functional. And if you see here, I can still roll up the blind behind it, and I can still get to the window, and I can actually move the window up. So everything is still functional, but I can actually get everything up off the ground, and right now it's on the window sill. So I'm getting everything up in the air, and actually the internet and all that gets better signal being up higher off the ground directly in front of the window. That was the main motivation for actually creating this anyways. So to get those tops and bottoms cut, I cut them at 10 inches. The finish of this is going to be 10.5 because of the width of this wood on the front, but I just tried to keep this really simple. I wasn't going for anything super specific, so I just cut it at 10 inches. I first cut my pieces to length so it'd be a little bit easier to handle by myself on the table saw. I cut them just past 42 or 43 inches. Since the base was cut right at 43 inches, I knew that I wanted to match the top and bottom with the base. So I cut it a little bit further, and then I ran everything through at 10 inches. I made sure I had 4 pieces. Then I trimmed them to length to be the exact same length as my base. That's because when I slide these things on, you'll see they were super tight. There was no wiggle room left or right. However wide you make your base, you can choose to make your top a little bit wider. Let's say you want like a 42-inch width base, but you want your shelves to be 46 inches. You could have several inches hang off and still have plenty of room to secure this thing into your base. But I just cut everything to be the exact same width so that it would go on there and have a tight fit when I'm all done. But again, you can play with that. The main thing is that at a minimum, I needed my base to be able to reach to both of those 2x4s that are inside the wall here, so that no matter what, I knew that when I secured the base to the wall, I would have something really secure to tie it into. So I used these 3.5-inch framing screws that I knew would drive into wood in both places on both sides. And that way I knew that once this was up, I wouldn't have to worry about it. But now once I have my tops and bottoms all cut out, everything is cut to the right length, everything is exactly the same. This is where you could pick whatever type of material you want to actually finish your shelf in. I was going for a two-tone look. So this, if you can see here, it's actually painted white. So same type of white that's in the room. If you were doing some type of wood that could be finished, this is where you could kind of make it your own. Use what kind of wood you want here. I even thought about doing like an oak face so that it would have kind of like a dark tone, but that would definitely increase the total cost of everything. So I wanted to keep it as cheap as possible. Even poplar right now isn't cheap, but again, I think both pieces were $15 or $16 each, and I bought them at 8-foot lengths. So I had a little bit of scrap, but I knew that the width and the runs towards the wall, I could cut out of each 8-foot piece and have a little bit left over to play with. So the length here is just over 10 inches, or actually it's just about exactly 10 inches because I overlaid the face over the top of the end grain right here. So this is the part where it kind of makes it to whatever custom size you have. You're gonna make these measurements on the fly. If I was planning ahead and I was producing these things, I could have a whole entire cut list. And I know that I would need, 8 sides or 10 sides, and then I could cut a bunch of face plates and cut them all the same. But what I did is I took my base, I laid it on the table, I took my sides, I put it there. So rather than measuring the thickness of the top and bottom in addition to the width of the base, and then cutting my face wider, I just laid it all up on the bench, threw a measuring tape next to it while it was all sandwiched together. Then I had my width. That was just over 4 3/4, and that gave me just about a 1/16 of a lip on the top and bottom to play with. So I could still make everything very snug and not have too much play in there, but I had a little bit to play with the face just in case. So this was 4 3/4. I cut this to width. Then I measured the length. Just again, I measured it. It was 10 inches. Then I measured it side to side. As I started to kind of put this thing together, I run some glue along the sides here. I nail on my end piece and I make sure it lines up nice and flush. Then when I had that done on both sides, I measured end to end exactly what this would be. Again, you can measure all this stuff and know that you have 1/2-inch material, 3.5-inch 2x4, and you can add it all together. But we all know that if you're making something like this and you go ahead and cut everything together and you don't dry fit it first, you end up missing something, or something is a little bit curved or warped. So I just like setting it there. Since I'm only making 2, I set it on the bench, took the actual measurements, cut it to width, and then that way I knew it fit. After that, I went through and I just kind of filled in some of the nail holes, sanded it with a 220 grit because it didn't really need a lot of extra finish. I did sand down the edges to kind of round them slightly. If there was any bit of overlay where I had a lip, I just sanded it down. This material is so soft, if you try to take a router or some type of chisel to it, it usually chips on you. The last thing I did is I test fitted it all to make sure that everything still slipped in. So before I mount the base to the wall, I made sure that the base actually fit inside each one, and I numbered them. This has number 1 written on the inside of the shelf and the base. And then this is the one that I measured, and I did number 2. And I just kind of made sure that this base for sure goes with this shelf. Because I'm actually fitting everything and cutting them to size, there may be some variances. So I didn't want to get up here and try to flip flop it and then run into a problem. So I numbered them. That way I know this base goes with that shelf, and then we can put them up and have no problems once we're installing. Also along the top, I marked 3 inches knowing that my base has 3 inches of wood to screw into. Then I staggered a countersink bit, and probably, again, this is where it's kind of overbuilt. I put several screw holes all the way across the top. When you go to finish this and you want to secure it, you could probably use less screws, but I did them zigzagged across the whole top, knowing that they're going to land in the top of that base, which is 3 inches of wood. Then I could put the screws in there. Then in the future, if I don't like the look of those screws, I wouldn't paint over them. I'd probably just go get those stickers that you see on some of the furniture, and you actually put little flat stickers that are matched the same color. It kind of depends on how you want to finish it. You could make these semi-permanent and put them up there and just tack nail them in place. I wouldn't really recommend gluing them in place, because if you ever do want to take these off, you're going to literally have to cut and rip them off the wall. So do something like a screw or maybe a small nail, like a finish nail, that will keep it up there and it will hold with any weight. But if you do have to take it off, you don't have to bring out the sledgehammer. Now, before we get to painting these or staining them, whatever you decide to do, I did end up putting some of the matching paint on just the top and bottom. I may still come back later and stain the front of these just to kind of give it more of a darker tone, but right now I like the way it looks, and I'm just trying to get this room done. So that way we can get the furniture and the desk and all the equipment moved in here. So I kind of just want to get everything up off the floor so we can move forward with the rest of the projects. But maybe later on I'll come back and hit this with something or paint it to match. But I wanted to go ahead and secure the bases to the wall, because that's really the only next big step in this whole process. What I did is I measured over 3 inches on either side, knowing that I had the 36-inch clearance in the middle, and then I had the 3 inches on each end to make sure that when I did screw into it, I would screw into the wood that I know is in the wall right here. You can also take a stud finder like this and you can actually run it across the wall. Sometimes you may have 2 or 3 different pieces of wood, so just something good to know if you want to make sure you have something really solid to screw into. And that way, where those holes are pre-drilled, I know that they line up where there's wood in the wall. I pre-drilled them deep enough, and on the top part that is 3 inches deep, I had to actually pre-drill with a 1/2 inch. Then I drilled smaller through, so that way I knew that my 3.5 inch screws would not have to be wasted or sitting through the whole entire top piece of that wood. So I allowed it to kind of like countersink, and I just countersank it all the way in. Then I put them up on here, threw a level across the top, and then I start to drive those nails in, and they definitely hit wood on both sides. Main thing is just making it level. What I decided to do here was make sure that it was still above this part of the window, because I still want to be able to have this thing be functional. So I can still open up the window, I can pull it up, close it. We don't ever really use this that much, but just in case, I wanted to be able to still use this window and not put it completely out of commission. So that's why I chose this height. Also, I'm gonna have some workbenches here possibly, so maybe I'll be able to work in front of it and it won't be in the way. It's right at eye level, so I can still reach the stuff that's on here. So whatever you decide to do, just kind of plan that stuff ahead so you don't end up having a problem later after you've already drilled some holes in your wall. But get both those bases up there, do yourself a dry fit. I did have to adjust this one slightly. I had to shave off a little bit, just took a little chisel and shaved off part of that base, because the edge, the wood, it has a little bit of a bend to it. So as I'm putting the shelf on, I couldn't get enough flex because I made it too tight. So I made it right to exact. So unless I really wanted to torque on the shelf, I just wanted to shave off a little bit of wood so it would slide on. Once I know that they slide on and off, I took them out, painted them, sanded them one more time, made sure it was cleaned up and looked the way that I wanted before we secure them. So now that we have everything finished, we go ahead and slide it up there in place and we can secure it to the base. I'm just using 2-inch drywall screws, knowing that it has no problem going into this wood. They're gonna give me at least 1 inch of bite into that base, and I know that they're gonna be definitely secure. Again, use whatever finish screw or nail that you want. I could probably use half as many as I did. Because I countersink them, they are gonna sit all flush with the top. So I just go ahead, put my screws in, put the top one on, put those screws in, and then we're pretty much finished. And there you have it. That's how I made these floating shelves. Hopefully I inspired you. If you have any questions or if you have any comments of how I could have done something different, leave them in the comments below. I'm really good at getting back to those. I really do like hearing from people and seeing what they have to say. I'm really good at replying back to all the comments. So whatever you do leave down there, I usually do reply back to it. It's actually me. I like to spend time. If you took the time to comment, why shouldn't I take the time to comment back? I appreciate the views. I appreciate the likes and the subscribes. If you haven't already, please consider doing so. I have other projects here where I will be moving an outlet from just down below this window, just above the window. So that way I can plug everything in just right over here to the side, and I'll have the electrical actually moved up. So if you're interested in how to move electrical, I have a couple videos coming out right now showing that step process of just moving it up, and even another video of how to move it over across through different studs. But other than that, we're done here. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next build.